It's no surprise that we went to war with Iran. That was clearly coming. Now, obviously, there was some hope, a lot of hope, that maybe that wouldn't happen. There were people lobbying on behalf of peace that obviously didn't pan out. But what's really surprising, at least to me, is the amount of brainwashing that has happened to the American people over the years, the amount of disconnect from the promises that he made to the reality of what Trump is carrying out. And that has left me a little bit disillusioned. I've been arguing with people online, and I've talked to some people in person, of course, about this and whatnot. And I am quite surprised at how easily people are manipulated into believing the official story and into forgiving Trump. I've been to the rallies. I've been to multiple rallies. I've been to a CPAC a couple years ago, and I can tell you with a certainty that besides immigration, behind immigration, the number two, the largest campaign promise that got people really excited was this idea of no more foreign wars, no more sending American troops to die overseas for policies and for agendas that have nothing to do with the American people. None of that betters the American people. But you wouldn't necessarily you wouldn't necessarily think that's the case if you talk to a lot of people these days. And so I think a lot of the people who were supportive of that, I bet you there's a big section of them right now who think that because President Trump said it needs to be done, because he lied about there being an imminent threat, there wasn't an imminent threat. The intel, US intel, has already cleared that up after the attack. We already knew that was the case. It was not in Iran's interest to even pretend or even look like they were going to do something and aggravate and give Uncle Sam a reason to lower down his mighty hammer. That wasn't the case. They were looking for a reason to go to war with Iran, and I'm going to get into what some of those reasons may be. But when I try to talk to people and be like, look, first of all, this war is illegal. And people can't even, I've had people try to tell me that this isn't even a war because there's boots on the ground. Well, first of all, Trump called it a war. And I don't know what definition of war people use, but when bombing the crap out of a country is not an act of war, then we're not operating on the basis of reality. So we can't talk. We can't have a debate if you cannot come to terms with with basic terms. Okay, if we can't agree on the most basic definitions that are just widely understood, then you are so far gone that you're beyond help. I don't know what else to tell you. And there's people like that. They're like, this isn't an act of war. He called it an act of war, and we're bombing the crap out of him. It's a freaking act of war. You need to get a checkup. Like, okay. Secondly, they say it's not illegal. And they talk about the War Powers Resolution of, I believe, 1973. Go and read the War Powers Resolution of 1973, and you'll see that the permission is contingent on getting a declaration of war from the legislature, from Congress. Okay. Then, of course, there is the Constitution that makes it clear that 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 you cannot go to war. A president cannot unilaterally take the country to war without a declaration, without permission from Congress. In Article 1, Section 8, there are all these clauses that make clear that it is Congress's duty to, first of all, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11 says that Congress shall have the power to declare war. Okay, and you look at this, you look at the following clauses, and it basically it gives the permissions, it gives all the duties of war to Congress. Now, Article 2, Section 2 This is the one that they say this gives the president unilateral decision to catapult the country into war. What it says is the president shall be commander in chief of the Army and Navy of the United States when called into the actual service of the United States. What does that mean? When called. It means when Congress has declared war, then you are called up to be the commander in chief. That's what that means. Nothing has changed that. And if that's not convincing enough, there is a in Federalist number 69. Alexander Hamilton explains, remember the Federalists, they were written to explain to the American people the Constitution. This was before the Constitution was ratified. So these founding fathers, they wrote a bunch of essays and they had them published, and they were to explain all the various parts of the Constitution. So in Federalist 69, Alexander talks about this very topic. He says the president will have only the occasional command of such a part of the militia of the nation as by legislative provision may be called into actual service of the Union. The King of Great Britain and the Governor of New York have all times the entire command of all the militia within their several jurisdiction. In this article, therefore, the power of the president would be inferior to that of either the monarch or the governor. And he goes on to say, the president is to be the commander in chief of the Army and Navy of the United States. In this respect, his authority would be nominally the same with that of the King of Great Britain, but in substance, much inferior to it. Here it is. It would amount to nothing more than the supreme command and direction of the military and naval forces as first general and admiral of the Confederacy, while that of the British king exceeds to the declaring of war and the raising and regulating of fleets of armies. Okay? So again, it's solid. The president of the United States is not a king. He's not a dictator. He does not have the right to single-handedly make the decision to send the country to war. That's what dictators do. And the fact that there are so many people who want to defend this is a very concerning sign. This is a very concerning sign because I don't know where this country is going to go if the conservatives, the people who are supposed to be for limited government, can't even smell this out. They can't even defend this part out. They can't stand up and say, you know what? This is overstep. You are overstepping your power because now we've set precedent. And the next guy, well, I guess we've already set that precedent. But now we have now it's clear that both sides, the left and the right, they're not principled people. They're not principally based. They're party based. And that means that we are in a world of hurt. So that's one of the things I really wanted to touch on. And I'm hoping that some sort of sanity prevails. I'm hoping that more people wake up. There's obviously a segment of people, and I'm obviously not talking about just myself, but I know there's still a large segment of people. There's some hope among old MAGA people, core MAGA people, which I consider myself, who are principally based and will not acquiesce, will not fall into the Trump cult. And that's what this is. I know that the left was right on this and I saw that right away when I've been to the events. I literally heard people at the rallies and at CPAC. I would hear people saying that only Trump can save America. And I'm like, that's a very dangerous outlook. And I would tell my wife when I'd come back, and I would tell my colleagues the same thing. I was like, hun, the left is right in some instance. There is a cultish element to the Trump movement, and now we're seeing it. We're seeing it. The guy just launched a war for no reason other than because Israel dragged us into it. It has no benefit to the U.S., to America, but they believe it does because he lied about it. He lied about it. And they also believe it because everyone operates, this is another part I want to mention, everyone seems to operate on this erroneous assumption that it's normal to have all those assets in the Middle East. Because if you hear Lindsey Graham and you hear Tom Cotton and you hear all the proponents of this war, one of the things that they're all saying, as if like on cue, is that that Iran is the largest state sponsor of terrorism, right? You'll hear that over and over. And I'm not saying that they aren't a large sponsor of terrorism. You listen to Larry Johnson, he would say the US is, but, the largest sponsor anyway. But what people aren't thinking about, because this has been baked in, the assumption is that we wouldn't have all those casualties. The president wouldn't be able to make this case. He's like, they've done this for 20, 30 years, whatever, all these years going back. And he mentioned the 1983 Marine barracks attack in Beirut, which happened, which is a tragedy. But what a lot of people don't talk about and they don't mention is that why are we there in the first place? At what point in the history of the United States did the American people vote to build hundreds of bases around the world, all over the world, and occupy all these places? You know what point? At no point. At no point whatsoever did the American people agree to be an empire. At no point whatsoever did the American people, who are now nearly $40 trillion in debt, agree to use trillions of dollars to build bases to occupy places around the world and make enemies of people who would not think about us at all unless we're sitting there in their land. And why do we not think about that? Why do we not think about that? Does it make sense that they would that they would be mad and hostile toward us? What would we do if a bunch of, if a foreign power, powerful nation starts setting up bases in our country and started running around doing what it wants? We wouldn't be happy about it either, right? But they've also, another element of the brainwashing is that they try to frame this kind of talk as unpatriotic. And I noticed this when arguing with some vets who I have a lot of respect for because they mean well. And I think some of the campaigns they probably engaged in, may have done some good or whatnot. But they drum this stuff into their head. And then if and it's not just them, it's the American people. They drum these ideas into their head that we're over there to liberate, and that all these people around the world hate us. And by looking at things from their perspective, by daring to to, to think of something from their point of view, that it's unpatriotic. But I'm not necessarily thinking about it from their point of view as much as I'm thinking about what's good for us. It is not good for us to spend trillions of dollars over there when we have so many problems here. It makes no sense. It's a complete lie to say that if we all came back home and we kept our borders secure, and we kept a good military on deck, and our intelligence agencies actually did their job and whatnot, that we would be in danger. We would be in less danger. That's without a doubt. So it is the most patriotic thing to question your government. That's how this country was built. And I think it's time that people start doing that. It's time that people start realizing that maybe we're not the good guys that they lied to us and they told us they were. They tell these soldiers all sorts of lies. And they send them at the risk of their lives. And it's a damn shame. It's a damn shame. I have family members who've been scarred by tours in Vietnam and Afghanistan. I know them. I've heard their stories. And it didn't have to happen. It happened because someone who's sociopathic made decisions that were not in their interest. And they lied to the American people to get their support for it. So, it's really frustrating, all of this. I want to go through some possible reasons for why this is really happening. Now, most of you probably already heard the president's statement, and I'm not going to go over it. I guess I could. He said that basically there's an imminent threat, and he went through a list of grievances, including that they've been waging proxy wars and things like that, which is true. Um, but first of all, the whole imminent threat thing is a lie. And again, like I said, that's because we know that's true because after the war was launched, a report came out that U.S. Intel had briefed congressional staff and told them that Iran was not preparing to launch a preemptive strike. So that was a lie. Okay, and so I mean, that's part of for, of course, for Trump. But here's why this is really is happening. First of all, it's Israel. This is not anti-Israel, rambling. It's not conspiracy theory. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said it himself. He said it, I believe, Monday. He said, we knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that that would precipitate an attack against American forces, and we knew that if we didn't preemptively go after them before they launched those attacks, we would suffer higher casualties. Now, I don't know if I agree with that assessment. I think, I'm obviously not a military expert, and I can't say for sure. And so it could be true, but could also be that, maybe the US could have said, hey, we're not involved in any of this. Whatever Israel does, we're not connected to it. Leave us alone. And, Iran could have just focused on Israel. I don't see why they couldn't have done that. Iran wasn't looking to take on two very powerful militaries that they're overmatched single handedly by. So, maybe, I don't know. I don't know. But it's a thought, right? It's a thought. Like when, after the attack launched, Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the UK, he released a statement and he said we had nothing to do with it. Why did he do that? Because he didn't want Iran attacking UK interests. And as far as I know, I don't think they did. Right? So I think that would have worked. So I'm not buying that. Another reason that they might have done this is to distract from Epstein. Now, the Epstein thing was gaining a lot of momentum. There's still 2.5 million files they haven't released. And probably most interestingly, there was a news report that broke just days before that the DOJ had withheld I guess a very credible allegation or charging documents, or I don't know what kind of documents, because I guess they weren't released, that accuses Trump. The way that the Times reports it, the New York Times, is the DOJ withheld some key materials related to a woman who made an accusation against Trump. The materials are FBI memos summarizing interviews the Bureau did in connection to claims made in 2019 by a woman who came forward after Mr. Epstein's arrest to say she had been sexually assaulted by Trump and Epstein. Well, conveniently, no one's talking about the Epstein files anymore. Coincidence? I don't know. All right, then there's oil. Is it a coincidence that Trump has engaged in two regime change military actions this year, and they both happen to be in two of the top three most oil-rich countries in the world? Probably not. There's another strategic element to this, because Iran is a big supplier to China. And so if the US gains control over Iran's oil, then that could hurt China's supply. So that's a pretty big strategic advantage there. Then there's an interesting theory that Catherine Austin Fitts floated during an interview with Tucker Carlson. She thinks that Iran has been in regime change crosshairs because the regime would never allow the country to be part of the international digital prison system that they're creating. Now, of course, the argument would be, well, they're kind of a different prison systems, one by their own dictatorship, no argument here, but they would not be under the control of the insiders, the international insiders, who mean to basically build a digital prison for the whole world. So that's a good thought. I added this thought. This is also a result of Trump's vanity. Trump is a very petty person. I used to like him, and I've come to kind of detest him. I think he's a very sick person, and I think he's very vain. We know for a long time that, he tried to win the Nobel Peace Prize, and he was really whiny about it, really petty about it, and he didn't win it. Um, I'm not saying he shouldn't have won it. I don't you know, I think he was a good candidate for it, but he also, he wanted his face on Mount Rushmore. He's made several comments about how he's the best jobs president, the best president of this and that, whatever. So he's clearly obsessed with leaving a legacy. He is an egomaniac. So what better way to change the world way past your time than to affect regime changes in several key countries around the world? These effects will reverberate for years, for decades. And I think that makes Trump happy. Now, I'm not saying that these are all bad. It's like I'm not saying that Maduro being ousted is a bad is not going to benefit the Venezuelan people. I'm not going to argue that Khomeini wasn't a despot. What I'm arguing is, though, that there's larger dangers here when we let a man who has access to the most powerful military in the world do whatever he wants. I think that's far more dangerous than letting Khomeini and Maduro run their little tin pot dictatorships, banana republics, and leaving the rest of us alone. And again, I hear the arguments already. No, they wouldn't leave us alone. Yeah, to some degree, I guess, and, we can take various actions and whatnot, but a lot of the harm that are being inflicted upon us are because of us. The drugs that are coming through our borders is because we left the borders open. There's no more drugs coming through the border now. Why? Well, I don't know, because we sealed the border. You see how that works? The reason our troops are being hurt in the Middle East is because they're in the Middle East. You see how that works? So it's time for people to start rethinking, thinking differently about about challenging the assumptions. There's too many. There's too many who are more interested in defending Trump than the principles and the promises that he made, and that's not going to cut it because men always fail. Humans will always fail us, and it is not the American way. The founders did not devise a system based on parties and loyalty to presidents and kings or whatnot. It was quite the opposite. But that's not what we're having. We're having a lot of people who are so brainwashed by Trump that they're willing to go along with everything he says. And it's very disturbing. And I'm hoping it doesn't. I'm hoping that there's an awakening and more people start to think. I don't know. I don't know. I've had the flu, so I apologize if I seem um, uh, a little mixed brained here. See, I can't even get that right. Thanks for listening.